Good afternoon. Welcome back to the B&H event space. You are tuned into Close Up and Macro Photography Part 2. Today we're discussing more fundamentals, the wonderful Lester Lefkowitz. Lester, how's it going?
That's good, Derek. I've missed you. It's been a whole week.
A whole week, I know. Whatever could you have done without me?
Well, I think what's happened is the viewers from last week have spent every single day, the last 6 days, just practicing their close-up work and nothing else.
They better have.
No, absolutely.
It's the only way we'll have it. And if we have any new viewers that did not watch part 1, we're going to drop the link in there so they can get caught up, Lester. And
Good.
we did have some homework last week, so you guys are already behind in class. But I'll turn it over to Lester, let him do his thing. Remind you all, if you do have any questions, this is the place to ask them during the live session. So you could drop those right into the YouTube chat. Lester, I will see you in a bit for the Q&A.
Okay, well, let me get started here. Let me share my screen. Let's see if we can do this right. And I'm going to share screen 2 and say share. And Derek, just confirm you're seeing.
I'm seeing a Windows logo right
There we
now.
go. You're
There we
seeing
go.
black screen with the 5 dots.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we're ready to rock and roll here. Let's start at the beginning. And as I said last week, the impetus for starting this series was the 2 new books I've just produced. These are a big deal. There's over 1,700 new photographs in these books shot just for this production. 2 volumes, I think it's around 700 pages. So there's a lot of information. We will not cover all 1,700 pictures today. We're just going to give a smattering of the information that's in here. Hopefully you'll find it useful. Last week we did the introduction, and there'll be a link, as Derek said, so you can go back and watch that if you've missed it. And today we're going to do part 2, again, more fundamentals. The end of next month, we're going to do the advanced work, so that will also be 2-session series. One will be on the 20th of February, and the other one will be on the 27th. If you've missed this, and I think Derek has put it in the chat, this will be the link you can go to at B&H Event Space, and you can catch up on all the ones you've missed, both for mine and the dozens and dozens of other good ones that they've recorded. So we're going to concentrate again on some of the information in volume 1. And again, it's the basics with magnification up to 1x. If you want to know more about me, see more of my macro pictures, and maybe even get a copy of one or both books, you can go to macrophotographer.net. Easy to remember, macrophotographer.net. And there's links to all sorts of good stuff there. Last week, we talked about the 3 ways of getting close and a magnification of up to 1x, which is fine for many subjects about the size 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters. That covers a lot of interesting subjects. And I mentioned that a good way to get started would be to use close-up filters, which can be attached to any lens. They're particularly useful with slightly longer focal length lenses. We talked about extension tubes. There it's camera and lens specific, but this is better usually for the normal and slightly wide lenses. And then, of course, the third way we talked about macro lenses. Very important aspect of this business, because it's so tricky, was about focusing close up, and we're going to talk about that today in greater detail. So the suggestion initially was to turn off autofocus. Most people who do this a lot do not use autofocus. I did show some ways where you can use spot autofocus if you prefer. Generally, though, with autofocus off, you set the approximate magnification you want. And then we use the technique, if you're hand holding, of gliding in and out to focus. And that looks like this. So you slowly glide in toward the spot you want in focus. And when it looks good, you go click. Hand holding and close-up photography is not a great combination, because as you magnify the image, you also magnify camera shake. And so again, I'm going to suggest that higher than normal shutter speeds will probably be appropriate. And if necessary, better to raise the ISO. A little bit of noise is a lot better than a little bit of blurry pictures. To help yourself, you can lean on something, if possible. And as I said last week, the best thing in the world, especially when you're getting started, is a tripod, and we're going to talk about tripods in a moment. But if you don't have a tripod, you might want to use parts of your body to stabilize. It's much easier to focus this way and hold focus, or something like that. Again, more stable than just standing up. And great stability if you're willing to get down on your belly. And then you can get photographs like this. It's kind of handheld if you consider leaning your camera on the ground handheld. So now I'm going to give you some more suggestions here. And of course, as I said earlier, the best stable platform is, of course, a tripod. These are just some of the tripods I have accumulated over the years of being a professional photographer. There are actually a few more that are not in this picture. I am very frequently asked, Lester, what's a good, inexpensive, lightweight tripod? And the answer, especially for close-up photography, is there is no such thing. Sturdiness, stability, a little bit of weight is much more important in close-up than it might be for generic, say, landscape photography. So there are, two major flavors out there. They're the really, really cheap, lightweight, inexpensive tripods with horrible heads on top. And I absolutely recommend you do not get one like that. You will be very, very frustrated. The one on the right is much more appropriate. It has individual articulating legs, because out in the real world, the ground is not level. Each leg can be adjusted individually. And in this case, it has a nice big ball head. There's an old saw among photographers that say, they tell people, everyone has two tripods. The first tripod they buy is inexpensive and lightweight, and it's frustrating to use and they hate it. And if they don't give up photography, then they'll go out and spend significantly more money, but get a good tripod that they'll use the rest of their lives. So with a good kind of tripod for close-up photography, it lets you get down on the ground so that you can splay the legs out, and then you can get a worm's eye view of so many of the interesting close-up subjects are down on the ground. Many better tripods will allow you to turn the column upside down, so you again can get the camera very, very close to the ground, adjust the legs on uneven terrain, and you can wind up with a picture that looks like that. Or if you are going for more magnification, you can get that. And with the tripod, you can use low ISO for best quality. You can use whatever shutter speed is necessary, and you can choose your f-stop as optimum. And it slows you down. You can compose and get it just right. So especially for beginning, I'm a real fan of working with the tripod. Maybe as important or possibly more important than the tripod legs is a good ball head. A flimsy little ball head will not let you adjust the picture. Don't forget, in close-up photography, when you move the camera just a little bit, the scene in the viewfinder changes a lot. And how do you pick out a ball head? Well, price is one way, but one thing you might look at is what's called load capacity. I think is suggested on every one in certainly the B&H catalog. Now, you may say, well, my camera and lens only weighs, 2 pounds. Why do I need a 20-pound load capacity? Well, it turns out that the ones that have very light load capacity, like 8 or 10 pounds, while that may sound good enough for your camera, as soon as you start tilting it or adjusting it at an angle, it doesn't hold up well at all. If you're into this and want to do it well, invest in a good ball head. Some tripods do come with a good one, but if you're going independent legs and independent head, I'm suggesting that a ball head with a load capacity of at least 20 pounds is the way to go. And price to some degree indicates quality. And again, you can get a ball head for $15, but you will be very, very unhappy with it. I checked just before we started today, the B&H website, and they list 405 different ball heads, ranging in price from $8 to $1,230. You do not need a $1,200 ball head to make good pictures. but I'm going to recommend that the $8 one is guaranteed disaster and failure. So those are my ballpark suggestions, but a good tripod and a good ball head will make your life easier. I am serious that people start with a miserable tripod and a lousy ball head. They will give up on close-up photography because the pictures aren't sharp. It's very hard to adjust the scene. And they say, the heck with it. You know, I'm going to go back to handheld photography of landscapes and weddings. So that's my advice on stability. And if you do get a new tripod or ball head, I also strongly recommend you get one that has what's called an Arca Swiss style clamp. This is kind of a universal system now that's been adopted by most manufacturers, not all, but most. And it allows you to quickly attach your camera to a very sturdy clamp. When you lock this in, it ain't going nowhere, no vibration, and it's a system that I recommend for anyone buying a new tripod and or a new ball head. Another way to get low to the ground that I've come up with is I use something called a super clamp, and I keep it attached to one of my legs, and I put my ball head on it. And this way I can easily go very low to the ground or medium or high up. And the super clamp looks like that. And B&H sells super clamps made by 5 different companies. They're fundamentally all the same. And then you screw your ball head on top of that and you're good to go. So now that we've got a very stable tripod and a good ball head, you're not going to ruin that by pressing the shutter release. So when you're all set, if you touch the camera, that little bit of finger pressure on the shutter release can shake the camera and make a blurry photograph. The way to avoid that, I guess the most fundamental way, is almost all cameras have a self-timer built in. So if you set your camera to self-timer, when you push the shutter button, you get 10 or 12 seconds for the camera to settle down, and then click, it goes automatically, the shutter goes off. So if that's all you have, that's a great way of working without having to purchase anything extra. More convenient way to work, if you're doing a lot of this, is to get yourself a remote release. It's just a button on the end of a wire, and it allows you to trigger the shutter without touching the camera. The plug itself is camera specific, so make sure you get the right one for your camera body. If you don't like the wire, you can get a wireless one. Now you have a receiver on top of the camera, usually in the hot shoe, and you hold the push button in your hand and you can trigger the camera very often from quite far away. So that's another way of triggering the camera. Some cameras, these are usually more of the more consumer level cameras, allow you to use an infrared trigger. It's like the little clicker on your TV set. And this is another way of triggering the camera. These are quite inexpensive. And on some models of cameras, the manufacturer has a software app that you can put on your phone, and it connects to your camera, I think usually through Bluetooth, and you can, again, trigger the camera without touching it. It's not available for all cameras, but it's usually available for the higher end cameras. So something to look into if you'd like to work that way. If you do not use a mirrorless camera and have a more traditional digital SLR, which has a mirror in it, when the mirror flops up, it's going to shake the camera. It's nothing that you would see in conventional photography, but it does occur when you magnify the image. It also magnifies the shake. So if you have an old digital SLR, they're fine cameras, but they have the mirror inside. If it has a mirror up setting where the mirror gets locked up before the shutter is pressed, recommend that you use that. You can't always use a tripod. It's not practical, or you're not allowed, or you're chasing insects or something where clearly a tripod is not practical. So something that I use a lot is, it's called a stick. And I don't think B&H sells a stick. I think I got this one at Home Depot, but you could use a broom handle. And what it allows me to do is I get more stability by planting the stick just, next to my foot. And I can slide my hand up and down, and therefore I can quickly adjust the vertical position if I'm chasing insects. And it's a lot better than hand holding, and obviously not the same as a tripod. But it's something I use a lot in the field. You might consider it. For some reason, the airlines don't let you bring a 6-foot stick on the airplane. So then you could use a monopod. It's not as nice, and I don't mount the camera on top of the monopod. I still use it the same way that I slide my hand up and down, so it's very fast. Trying to adjust the single leg on the monopod is much too slow. This is a fast system. Strongly recommend it for field use. Makes focusing much easier and more precise. Indoors, I'm a fan of very often, instead of working horizontally on a tripod, I like to work on a copy stand. Not all subjects lend themselves to work like this, but many do. And I prefer this over a tripod if it's appropriate. It's much more stable. The problem is that most of these vertical stands called copy stands were made for copying documents at relatively low magnification, and they're not particularly sturdy. So I've come up with this system, and it's just it consists of a base, a wood base, and a piece of pipe from a home center store that's nominal American size, 1-inch diameter. Here's a super clamp. Here's a pipe flange for putting the pipe on the board, and this is an adapter so I can attach my camera. It's got a 3/8 thread here so I can put my ball head on to this rig, and inexpensive and extremely sturdy. So there's information in the book about how to put that together. Now, if you don't want to build your own copy stand or purchase one, the alternative is you can buy these extension arms that are made to fit on any tripod with a 3/8/16 stud coming out of the center column. And there are some brands of tripods where you can raise the center column and rotate it 90 degrees and get the same configuration. So either it's part of the tripod, or in this case, it's an accessory. It's called a side arm, I believe. And I have this brick beautifully attached with some gaffer tape to counterbalance this. This is not a particularly stable system. If you touch this, it's going to vibrate a little bit. So for sure, you can see on the left is my remote control wire. And make sure you wait for everything to stop vibrating before you push the trigger. It does work, but it's a little less stable than we would like. What I have down here, my subject is a piece of sea fan coral, and the very sophisticated lighting system is one LED reflector flood bulb. That's it. There's nothing else. It's put on a piece of black paper. And this whole setup made this picture. Very easy to do. The trick here also is, as I explained last week, you want to keep the camera body as parallel to the subject as possible so that the picture is sharp from corner to corner and edge to edge because of this very shallow depth of field you normally have. So decent photograph made with just one light. Easy to do. Now, we talked about the need for precision focus. Remember, handheld, we talked about doing it this way. But if you're on a tripod or even a copy stand, there's a mechanical way of moving in and out with a device like this, and it's called a focusing slide. Some people call it a focusing rail. And by turning the knob, you can very precisely move the camera in and out and get the focus exactly where you want. It's a wonderful way to work. There's no guessing. It's precision. And focusing slides come in many, many varieties. B&H has dozens of them, I'm sure. If you're getting started, certainly the relatively inexpensive ones are fine. They'll get the job done. As you go to higher and higher magnification, started, purchase almost anything, and you'll see how nice it is to focus rather than trying to turn the focusing ring on the lens it's much easier just to move the camera in and out. Speaking of equipment, in the back of both volumes of the book is an appendix that lists all the equipment that's shown in every chapter. And for example, we were just talking about focusing slides, that was in the chapter 3, and there's a section here on focusing slides, and it has a list. It says better quality, and below that it says more sophisticated or more expensive. And I don't recommend brands. I never do that, but I'll say these are 3 brands that are similar that will do A or B. And people find this very helpful because it indicates the source of supplies for so many of the gadgets and equipment that we need in the close-up business. And that is in the back of both books. Let's talk about lighting. It's as important in close-up photography as it is in conventional photography. Believe it or not, this is the largest chapter in the book. I think it's like 45 pages because there are so many cool ways to do lighting in close-up photography. We can start out outdoors with natural light, and there, of course, you're dependent on the weather and the sun and the time of year and all that kind of stuff. So on a cloudy day, this rusty old hinge on a tumble-down shed looks kind of blah. If you come back on a different day at just the right time, you get some really nice graphic lighting. You get these nice shadows of the big round balls, and it's just 2 different days, or maybe a different time of the same day if the sun comes out from the clouds and if it's the right angle. A few hours later, the sun goes behind the shed, and then there's no picture on the right. Similarly, if the sun is at a low angle and you've got some big leaves around, you let the camera take advantage of the backlighting. The light is coming through the leaf, and you can make a picture like that. Again, all you depend on is the sun. It's around most of the time. Similarly, using the sun, this is on the west coast, that is the Pacific Ocean, and you can see the sun is low on the horizon. In another half hour, it will be underwater, so to speak. And I was driving on the road up here in the corner. You may be able to see that. And it lit up these wild weeds, flowers. I'm sure someone has a better name than that. And I quickly jumped out, and using the backlight, I was able to get that. Now, literally 10 minutes later, when the sun angle changes, I probably wouldn't have gotten this picture, but I took advantage of the sun going almost right through and lighting up these flowers or weeds. Similarly, early in the morning, I noticed this. This is just maybe 15 minutes after sunrise, and I get this very graphic image on these semi-tropical big fat leaves. Again, a few minutes later, the sun is overhead and all the pretty shadows have disappeared. Another early morning shot, I think this one was in Italy. It had rained in the evening. This is a plastic bench. So the water has beaded up on the bench. It looks like styrofoam or water, but because the bench is white, you're looking through the wetness onto the plastic. And again, the very low sun angle made these very dramatic graphic shadows. And just by wandering around and noticing it, it's not super close up, but I thought it made a nice picture. And it's only successful because of the sun angle. I normally don't like the middle of the day with the sun high up, but sometimes it works for you. So this little guy is in a, I guess it's a daisy, and the sun is straight overhead. Now you've got to be careful because sometimes when you get close, your body, your head is blocking the light. So at whatever angle I was able to get here, it worked out pretty well. This is straight sunlight going right down into the center of the flower, but worked out okay. You can see I'm not totally parallel to the scene because the back half of the picture is out of focus. Now, maybe if I was parallel to it, my head would have blocked the sun, so I had to work at an angle to make sure the light got in and not being blocked by my dense skull. So you got to look in the scene and move around a little bit to get what you need. Now, that harsh sun, which I usually don't like for flowers, you have a situation like this. potted plant sitting on the porch, half of it in sun, half in shade. And if you photograph the sunny part, it's very, very harsh. I would suggest very unappealing. There are these great little diffusers. These things fold up to 1/3 their size. You can stick it in a shirt pocket. And they diffuse the light. They basically make instant shade, but they're not opaque. They let the light through, but in a very, very soft way. And so this is the results that you get. And this is what you got before without it. So these little diffusers, they come in all sizes, but whatever size you get, it folds up into 1/3 of the expanded size. It comes in a little zipper pouch, relatively inexpensive. If you're out doing things like flowers, it's a great accessory to have. Doesn't cost much and takes up very little room. Another way to make instant shade is to just block the light. Now here's a big piece of cardboard. I have used my body. I have implored friends to please stand here and block the sun. Sometimes, there's no shade around, so I make my own shade if possible. I use my hat sometimes to block the light. Was ever necessary, because in the sun, I think that looks horrible. And if you just make instant shade, you get that. That's a lot better. Another picture I took in the shade, I moved. This is the skull of a deer. I think it's a deer that our dog found in the woods. And out in the sun, it would have been horrible. So I brought it under the porch. And these borders here, all skulls, yours and mine and the deer, are made up of a series of bony plates. And they're held together by a fibrous material, and they're called sutures. And you can see that's what it looks like. And the reason this exists this way is because when we're born or a baby deer is born, their head and their brain has to expand. So this allows the plates to move a little bit as the head and brain expand. And then eventually, when the animal or us reach our normal size, then the suture material gets sturdy and stiff, and then it can't expand anymore. So these are called sutures. And yes, it does occur in human beings, because I do own a real, or half of a real human skull. This is one of my assistants who I didn't like, so we just chopped him up. And if you zoom in, if you put a light behind it, you can see it has the same suture structure as the deer head. Kind of interesting things you learn when you're making pictures. Again, not spending any money. Indoors, the sun is coming in the window, and I put some weeds on a glass on the top of this window. And if you're lucky, the sun's coming through it, you get a picture that looks like that. On a tripod, of course, but no cost in lighting equipment. Same room, different side of the room. I set up this very sophisticated studio. The backdrop is an old sweater. Nice soft light coming in. You don't want direct sunlight for this particular picture. The other one was direct sunlight. This is the opposite. This is very soft light. Camera on the tripod, remote release, and that's the kind of simple, elegant picture with the old sweater as a background. So it's easy to do, doesn't cost anything. Also, another place in my house, I have a nice big window. So I had this collection of dried flowers, and there's a big white reflector board on the side. It could be a bed sheet, it could be a bath towel, doesn't matter what it is, just want to punch some light back into the shadows. Now, if you have a sunny day and you're not using the reflector board, it looks like that, which to my mind is kind of harsh. When the sun goes behind the clouds, or if you have a north-facing window, you get something that looks like that. It's quite a difference between here in the sun and here in the nice broad sky. Now, you may like this, but if you put the big reflector board in, you get that. So it opens up the shadows a little bit. Again, this is without the big piece of cardboard, and this is with it. So it's your choice. I would suggest that personally, I do not like that version, but maybe you do. Again, making use of natural light. Here's a Nautilus shell that was cut in half. This is one of my favorite studios. This is the kitchen table. I do have a sliding glass door, which is nice. It doesn't face north, but after a few hours in the morning, the sun is on the other side of the house, so I don't have to worry about harsh light. The very sophisticated stand here is a bunch of books piled up and a piece of cloth draped over it. And just using the window light and the camera on the tripod, I'm able to get that shot of the center of the Nautilus. And using the same studio, the kitchen table, that flower, just the black background, but it's all natural, natural light coming through the window. Another thing to consider when you're outdoors is if you can't control the light, you can control your position. So this is a poppy flower, one of those bright red poppies that has lost its leaves. And what's annoying is the background. If you just walk around to the other side, I noticed that the background was in the shade, and I got the same thing, much better. So I always say that the first thing you see is obvious, and obvious is usually boring. And so after you take your first one or two, start thinking about, well, now that I've been attracted to the scene, but how can I make it better? How can I make a better photograph? And very often it's just a matter of moving your butt. Stand up, get down lower, get on your knees, get on your belly, move to the left, move to the right. That may make a better picture, or it may not, but you've got to explore. Don't take one click and walk away, because the best ones may be the angles and shots that you did not take. Same example here. Here's another example. So here is a big leaf. I think it's called an elephant ear. It's really large. And this is the sun on the back of it. Direct sun, you can see the strong shadow from the stem. But if you walk around the other side, because the leaf is translucent, you get that. I think much more interesting than the version on the left, just by walking around to the other side of the elephant ear. Similar example. This, I forgot the name of this flower. I'm not good at names. And this is the obvious. It's in the sun. Oh boy, look at the pretty magenta flower. Now, what I didn't notice until I got home was there's a little bee here, but that's not why I made the picture. And this is the obvious shot. But if you walk around the back, look what you get. Because the sun is strong, the petals are translucent, and it's a much better shot than this. So my advice, I say, poke around. Indoors, again, for nothing extra, we probably all have a table lamp somewhere. And so I have this fossil. It's called a white ammonite fossil. And I strung up a piece of blue cloth. You notice there's a white reflector card leaning against the teacup. I don't think B&H sells teacups. And when you get done, it looks like that. And all I had to do was turn on the lamp and use a white reflector card so the shadows weren't so dark. That's the whole big deal for making a nice picture. Very often when people think of close-up and macro photography, especially out in the field, they assume that everyone's got to use flash. And certainly it is very usable. All flash units come with this device on the right that's called a diffuser. And it's supposed to make the light softer and nicer. But in macro photography, it does nothing but waste light, because when the light goes into that plastic cup, it goes out in all directions and it doesn't go to the subject. It's just wasted light that goes top, bottom, and sides. What you need is a bigger source, not this ridiculous diffuser. So absolutely, you can throw that out or don't use it. You want to make the light source larger. That's the trick. So here's a great way of getting started, and that is with a diffuser like this. This is very similar to the diffuser I showed you to block the harsh sunlight. Again, it folds up to 1/3 its size. It's got a elastic band, so it fits on almost any lens. And what you want to do is set your flash for the widest angle beam it will make, because you want to fill up the diffuser. And it's this, the company that makes this is made by Angler. B&H sells them. You're going to have to save a lot of money because it costs $7. And when you use it, again, you got to make the light spread out as much as you can. So you want to push the diffuser as far from the light source as possible so it fills the whole diffuser. And a lot of people have gotten started in their outdoor macro work, especially with insects. And this is a great way, inexpensive way to get started. And that little device just folds up and you can put it in your shirt pocket. Highly recommended. There are similar devices, also not very expensive, that do the same thing. It makes the light source larger, which is what makes it better for macro photography. In the last few years, a number of independent companies have come up with these kind of hoods. They have to be ordered with a specific flash, camera, and lens in mind, which makes them a little less usable for me. And also, what I don't care is it's very uniform. You know, all the pictures look the same. And sometimes that big hood gets in the way and it bangs into the nearby foliage. But some people find these very successful and like them. Another way to work is with something called a twin flash. Again, many of these available from the camera manufacturers and independent suppliers. Um, Two lights, they can be adjusted and positioned around the perimeter of the lens. This is on the right is a homemade diffuser I added to the existing one that comes with the flash. Again, it makes the light source larger. And what's nice about these is you can adjust the power of each one independently. So you can get a little more shape, a little more modeling to your picture rather than having it absolutely uniform from both sides. So some people like that kind of setup. And kind of classic in the macro business has been ring flash. Uh, by the way, when you look at possibly purchasing one, these come as LED lights, continuous lights, and they also come as flash. For work in the field, you definitely want the flash version, not the LED version. And these make very uniform illumination, used a lot in the medical profession. Some people like them. Some of the better ones, you can adjust the power for half is the hemisphere, half the circle on one side versus the other. You get a little more shape. And also, you don't need through the lens metering. All of these have a power setting on the back from full power to 1/64th power. And just by adjusting the power, you can get the exposure, and then it doesn't have to be dedicated to a particular camera. My weapon of choice for my flash photography outdoors is something like this. This allows me, with the little ball head there, to position the flash the way I want, where I want. You could get a commercial diffuser. I made this one from some foam core boards and a hot glue gun, and the very sophisticated diffuser on the front is paper towels from the kitchen. Makes a very even illumination. Now, out in the field, particularly with things like insects, but also with flowers, this would be available light. This is an Atlas moth, which is huge. I mean, it's larger than your hand spread. And what I learned about these is they can't eat. So they only live about 1 or 2 weeks after they emerge from the cocoon. It's fascinating. So all the food has to come from the caterpillar, gets transmitted to the mature moth, and they live for 1 or 2 weeks. Fascinating to learn about that. These are quite large. But the lighting is horrible because they sleep during the day on the tree, so it's easy to photograph. But they're on a tree trunk and the light is horrible. If you use flash, you basically overpower the ambient light. When the flash is close, it's very powerful. So you can underexpose the background and it makes a far better picture. This versus that. This is me out in the field, and you can see I've got my homemade diffuser on the flash. And down here is a little critter I'm photographing, and that's what it looks like. And for that same kind of flash rig, I've made pictures like this. Beautiful little insect with iridescent wings. These are called love bugs. And what they're doing here is loving. This is another one I've made with that same rig. For New Yorkers, I will tell you that this was made at the Queens Botanical Garden. If you're a New Yorker, you might know where that is. This was not made in Queens. This was made in Costa Rica. Now, here's a case where I didn't want a black background because the flash usually overwhelms the natural light. So one of the tricks is to lower your shutter speed instead of using it the sync speed, which is typically a 200th of a second and might make the background go black by maybe using a 60th of a second. I still get the flash to freeze the insect and pick up some of the ambient light so it looks more natural rather than a black background. As a macro photographer, I was fortunate to have been born with 4 arms, which lets me position the flash where I want. Notice that on top of the camera is a wireless trigger. Now, I can hold the camera with one hand. I don't have to be super steady because the flash goes off in a 20,000th of a second, so it freezes any motion that I might have by holding the flash in one hand. And by doing this system, I can put the flash wherever I want, and I use this a lot. It's a fantastic way for me to photograph in the field. So here's an example. This would be your traditional flash on or near the camera of this mushroom. But because I can hold the flash behind and on top of the mushroom is somewhat translucent. That's 1,000 times better. Whereas the light coming from the front in the more traditional way is kind of ordinary. This is much better. And I can also take the flash and put it behind a flower, make it glow like that. Or I can put it underneath the flower, get a different version. I've also made these fairly large, although you can buy commercial versions also, again, from foam core and a hot glue gun. And out in the field, you can use it like this. You could hand hold the camera, but in this case, we're using a tripod. It's easier to compose. And with this rig that you see here, I made this picture. It makes the flower jump out from the background. I think it's pretty dramatic. Same day, just move a few flowers over. With that rig, I can hold it in one place, get this picture, move it around, and get that picture. This is more from the front, or kind of from the back and underneath, I can get that. So all with the same setup, just different positioning, and that's why I like to separate the flash from the camera, because if you have a fixed rig, you can't do that. And here's one that I took with a ring flash. So some people say it's flat, but in this case, this was at a flower show, and I like this picture. Flash is not always the best thing to do. This butterfly was shot with the flash on the camera, and because the light comes straight in, it's kind of blah. And I noticed that the sun was low, and a few minutes later, turning off the flash and letting the sun provide the illumination, I got that. So the light is going through the wings. It's a much nicer picture. So flash is not always better. This is kind of blah, and this is much, much better. So you got to be observant. Now here's one I shot with flash, another butterfly, but I had the flash off the camera to the side, so it's not so flat. I don't always use flash outside. This is called an anole, I think, A-N-O-L-E. Direct sun, but the right positioning of this little guy, and you can see the strong sun under his chin, but the direct sun made a great picture. You can see I tried to be parallel to the whole head, so everything is very, very sharp. This is interesting. I was photographing flowers on a tripod, and all of a sudden this little guy popped in, and I said, oh, I'll never get him. He'll fly away by the time I get the camera adjusted on the tripod. But he stayed put, and I got it adjusted, and then he flew away, of course. But he came back to the same spot, and then he flew away, and he came back to the same spot. And one of the things you'll learn is that is not unusual behavior. Dragonflies, for example, do that a lot. So if you photographed on a perch where there's some insects and they fly away, there's a good chance that they may come back to the same spot. I guess it depends on the species. So this is just lucky. As I said, I was out photographing flowers on the tripod, and I usually don't chase insects with a tripod. It's not practical. But this little guy was very cooperative. Here's another insect that was on we have a glass table on the patio, and I think he was hurt in some way because he didn't fly away. He walked around a lot. And by leaning the camera right on top of the table, I was able to get this photograph. Out in the field, speaking of using a tripod or not, here's the setup I was using to try to photograph that mushroom. You can see the camera is upside down, just about touching the ground. And I was out to photograph the mushroom. And lo and behold, I got a gift. This guy just flew right on top of my mushroom. I was so happy. And he flew away and he came back and he walked around. It was trying to kind of tricky chasing him with the focusing ring on the lens, but it did work. And, I take full credit for something that I actually should not take full credit for. I can thank the fly that came in, but very fortunate. Other times, I'm on the ground on my knees, and this is a millipede. I learned the difference between a millipede and the centipede is millipedes have 2 legs per segment and centipedes have 1 leg per segment. That's what you learn when you do macro photography. This is just available light. We're in the winter season right now in the US, and amaryllis plants grow usually around that time. And so I was gifted an amaryllis bulb by a friend of mine, and I decided to document its growth. So I put it on my kitchen table by the big window, and every few days with the camera on the tripod, I made another photograph. And a couple of days later, I decided, I think black. So I put a piece of black cloth against the wall, but this is all light just from the big window. And it was just wonderful to really watch the development of how nature makes a flower. I could have sat there for hours and hours. You could actually watch it sometimes move a little bit and make detailed photographs. Just lovely. Just so nice. I was so excited to do this. Here's a full bloom. Look at that. The color, it's startling. Absolutely intense. And you can get closer if you want. And it's starting to get past its prime now. One of the blossoms is starting to curl up, but I kept photographing. I didn't stop. And in fact, here's the last picture I did in the series. There are many more, but I'm just showing you a few. And here is my sophisticated studio. That's it. It's on the kitchen table. You can see the snow outside. This is from last year or the year before. Nice soft light, camera on the tripod, and every few hours or every few days you come in and make another picture. Easy to do. Now, let's talk about more ways of getting a little closer. We talked about getting up to 1x with accessories or a macro lens. And if you have a macro lens that typically goes to 1x, you can also add a close-up filter. And if you're working at this level, I would suggest getting one of the better Acromat close-up filters. So if you do that, these are grains of wild rice. On the left is what you'd get at 1x with a typical 1x macro lens. But you screw on the close-up filter, and now you can just get much closer, and it's not another lens. Another way to get closer is to use a teleconverter. A teleconverter is like an extension tube with glass inside. And of course, it's got to be camera specific since it goes behind the lens. And it looks like that. And it's got a sophisticated group of optical glass in the middle. They come in 2 flavors, 2x and 1x. And the way they work is a teleconverter can be used to increase magnification, or you can have the same magnification, but more working distance. And working distance, very often, when we're getting close, would be helpful to have more of it. The 1.4x teleconverter increases the magnification by 40%, or you get 40% more working distance if you keep the same magnification. But like all teleconverters, in this case, you lose one stop of aperture. So if your lens is set to f8, it's now going to act in terms of exposure and depth of field as though it's f11, one stop less. If you have a 2x teleconverter, and it doubles the magnification, that's pretty impressive. Or you can keep the same magnification, you get twice the working distance, but this one reduces the aperture by 2 stops. So if you're at f8 on the lens, effectively you're getting f16 back at the camera. So you'll have to increase the exposure time. Teleconverters are made by all the camera manufacturers for their specific lenses, not any lens, specific lenses. Kenko and Sigma do make ones that are more universal, but they do not fit all lenses. So you've got to check first to make sure that the teleconverter is compatible with your particular lens. Now, here's a scene where I used it. There's a park near me, and there's the happy couple. I am not a wedding photographer. I had nothing to do with them. This is me. There's my camera. And over here, far away, is the lens. And this happens not infrequently because you can't always get as close. I can't walk into the plantings. I'll be yelled at. I have a telephoto zoom lens there. And without any attachments, without a teleconverter, that's as big as I can get the rows. If I put on the 1.4x teleconverter, I can get that close. If I put on the 2x teleconverter, I get that close. And I can actually put them together, the stronger one closer to the camera, and get that. This will not win any awards for sharpness, but darn it, it's a good picture. Here's another similar combination. Again, there's my 70 to 200 millimeter zoom lens. I add a teleconverter and I put on a close-up filter. And we found this frog, right? And so there I am in the summer, a very hot day, and I've got that rig on a little tabletop tripod, and I'm slowly inching it toward the frog, trying not to scare it away. And so here's one of the pictures I got. And I said, okay, look, he's not moving. I'll just keep inching it closer and closer. And I did. And I got this picture. And you can see my head and the silhouette of my shoulders and his eye. And I got this close, and I want to take another one closer. And he jumped away. So this is pretty good. So the crazy combination of a lens that's not made for close-up photography, which is the telephoto zoom, added a teleconverter, put on a close-up filter, and believe it or not, I got this. There are lots of adapters now that you can mount almost any lens on another brand body. And if you have accessories, you want to buy used lenses, it's a great way to do close-up photography for much less money than maybe buying a full-blown new zoom lens. So in the book, I've got an example of kludged together components of lenses that have nothing to do with the particular camera brand, but with adapters, you can put these together. I'm not going to spend time now doing this, but like on the bottom here, I have an old Sigma macro lens from 2009 with a Nikon to Fuji adapter, and then that adapter went into an APS-C body from a lens that was made for Nikon back in 2009. And here's a Hasselblad lens. It's amazing. This is a Pentax screw mount lens, and you can put on a micro 4/3 body. So you might consider some of those things just for fun. If you have some old optics around, get yourself an adapter. Post-production is an important part of all photography, and no less so in close-up photography. So this was taken kind of in the shade, a very bright background. And the new versions, especially of things like Lightroom, give you tremendous ability now to start doing sophisticated masking, the kind of things you used to have to do in Photoshop, which is more difficult to use. And with special masking, again, you can go from here, the original shot, to here with the same scene as shot and some brushing work in Lightroom. Sometimes you're going to lose a little softness or get softness because when you use small apertures, you get something called diffraction, which we'll talk about in the advanced seminars. And you can use a lot of the new sharpening algorithms to greatly improve the sharpness of your pictures. So that's kind of an overview of today. I want to reiterate my advice of last time that it is harder. If you jump into this thinking, oh, it's easy, I'll just get a close-up filter or macro lens and make pictures, I think you'll be disappointed. I strongly recommend you practice. Again, I'll suggest maybe working inside initially with a tripod to get the feel and the hang of it. And it will take, for sure, lots of patience. And the other advice I give every time is that if you're impatient, it's probably not appropriate for you. We're going to do more advanced stuff on February 20th if you're interested, and that will talk more about high magnification and more advanced techniques, even for low magnification. And that's going to cover a lot of the things in volume 2, which is called high magnification and advanced techniques. So we'll talk about being able to photograph a sunset north and go in and just get the scales. This is not easy to do. We'll talk about how focus stacking can take a picture like this, small aperture, but it also gets the whole background in focus and make a far better picture with the blurry background, or get the whole darn insect in focus from antenna to the rear. And that's what focus stacking can do. It's totally changed the world of macro photography. And that's part 4 is going to be more about that stuff. So in conclusion, if you want to know more about me, my pictures, or possibly get a book or two, go to this website, macrophotographer.net. There's a big yellow bar on the top. Click on that and you can learn more about it. And so, Derek, that is all I have to say for today.
Wonderful. So what you're telling me, the long and the short of that I got is all I need is a broom handle and I can take pictures like you.
Yeah, but Derek, since I don't know how bright you are, you got to take the broom off the bottom of it. So
Been doing it wrong this whole time. That's what I'm going to blame my images on. I'm ready to just skip. I think as the host, I should be able to just skip to next week because I want to get to this focus stacking thing. That's what really, that's the one thing.
It has changed the world of close-up photography. It really has. And you don't have to do high magnification. You can use it for regular, and it's fantastic. It's easy to do. So, but you have to wait 3 weeks. I'm sorry, Derek.
Man, total left. I thought if I begged, do I
Now,
have to plead
also,
on here?
you might check some of the administrators there. Ask them if they want to start carrying brooms.
Who's gonna brand them? We're gonna have to work something out, like Manfrotto. Maybe Manfrotto. Manfrotto's gonna have to come out.
Yeah, right. Yeah, Manfrotto blue.
No,
It would
I'd
be
use a
black.
Manfrotto
It'll
blue.
be black with red highlights on it, right?
Sounds kind of sexy to me.
Yeah. Any questions? Do we have any questions?
I'm giving them time to get some questions in. So if you
Okay.
guys do have questions, we'll give you a moment here. I know sometimes, we got to let the information sink in
Well,
and
hopefully
marinate
they're
for a
so
minute.
busy paying attention, they're not writing notes. That's good.
That's what I'm doing. But I got to go back and back and back. This is such macro's tough.
Yes.
I think you have to see, like anything else, you have to really, some people just see in macro better, the way some people see wide angle, the same way some people see architecture.
Uh-huh.
But this, I mean, it helps. I don't think you can't do macro if you don't see that way. It just,
Yeah, you got to be curious, right? It
Mhm.
helps to be nearsighted, by the way. But you got to poke, just like we poke around in the real world, you've got to narrow your universe and start looking at the cracks in the sidewalk, kind of thing.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yep.
Definitely. Well, it looks like no questions, Lester. So
Okay.
we let you off the hook easy. Of
All
course,
right.
Lester will be back. We got more to this series. So if you guys didn't think of anything now, we didn't give you enough time to think of something. Come back to the next one. You know the drill. So Lester, huge thank you to you. We'll see you for part 3 coming up.
In a few weeks. Super duper.
Yes, sir. Sounds
Okay,
good.
Derek.
And to all of our viewers out there, thank you guys
Ciao,
as always for
everybody.
tuning in.
Righto.
That is it. Another
Bye.
edition of the V&H Event Space in the books. Catch y'all next time.
Okay.